Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Political Vigilante. My name is Graham Elwood. We are joined by returning guest, Christy I, and I hate to say former co-host of Boom Bust because it was a show that I really like watching. But in addition to many shows, RT America was shut down. Lee Camp, my friend and co-host on Government Secrets, has a theory that the Department of Justice leaned on RT America. So, Christy, first, before we get into like Bitcoin and crypto, which you're very knowledgeable on, can you tell us what you think or what you know happened as to why RT America got shut down?
Yeah, I think what Lee Camp was saying it's actually quite accurate. But then the other half of the story was also the big monetization aspect of it, because as a business, they make a big portion of their revenue through ads. And so what happened was DirecTV pulled their station. So RT America was shut down from DirecTV, from YouTube, from the Apple App Store. So they had their portable TV app on the Apple App Store, and that was also pulled out as well. So really, after all of those platforms basically delisted RT America, the only platform that didn't delist them was actually Pluto TV. So that was really unfortunate. But because of that, there was simply just no ad revenue. They were burning cash on the daily. As you can imagine, the studio out in DC where I used to host at, they staffed over 150 people in that office, and all of them have paychecks and all of them have lives. And it was a very expensive operation. And not to mention the equipment, broadcasting, all the satellite times, the advertisers. So once the advertisers pulled, once DirecTV pulled and all that, once Roku pulled as well, we were also distributed on Roku TV. They pulled out as well. So literally Pluto TV was the only one left standing. And that was simply not enough to sustain the entire business. So RT America announced that they were shutting down operations immediately that week. We all got notified on the Thursday or the Friday of. None of us really knew what was happening because it was just a very big, expensive cash burn. So the hope is there is a little rumor mill churning that there might potentially be a revival. But again, that is a rumor mill, and that is something to be seen in the future.
Well, I hope it comes back. But yeah, I do know. I remember Ron Placone and I were touring on the East Coast. I think it was 2019, and we were in DC, and we were both on Redacted Tonight with Lee. And so we were at those studios, and yeah, it was a nice professional TV studio facility. So I understand there's a huge overhead. Yeah. And the thing that's so troublesome to me is how can we sit there as Americans and say we have a free society? A cornerstone of a free society is free press. And so what this is like, we're not allowed to have any dissenting views. I watch the Western media's reporting on Russia and Ukraine, and it is so one-sided, not making excuses for anything Putin and the Russians are doing, but we're not allowed to even like hear a different point of view or talk about, we're not allowed to even these long interviews that are done with Putin where he's saying, and he's been saying this for years of like, we don't want NATO in Ukraine. We don't want NATO moving west. We don't want missiles in Ukraine. All things. And there's this interview he did last month where he was like, and again, I had to go searching for it online. I think it was through RT International, where he's like, can you imagine if we had Russian bases in Canada? Americans would go nuts.
Exactly. But it's also like, why should we be surprised? Because as you mentioned, you got demonetized simply for speaking against the mainstream grain. And also not to mention that even before all of this, when COVID happened, when the trade war happened, when there was dissenting opinions in China regarding the Hong Kong riots and everything, all of that was simply blocked out. So we don't hear any of that in Western mainstream media. If you have any sort of dissenting opinion these days, and I think this is a very dangerous path for Americans to be on. There was actually something I read a couple of days ago being like Yale law students, and these are law students. So these are people who are trained to question materials and question the facts and validity of it, that these law students were getting so into their opinionated facts that they would not hear a dissenting opinion. And when they hear a dissenting opinion, these law students just started booing the guest lecturer and calling the guest lecturer out, being like, you woke B-word and all of that. And these are Yale law students, so they're supposed to be very professional and everything. They're supposed to have an inquisitive mind, question the facts and question the validity, but like they wouldn't even hear another side of the same story. They wouldn't hear a dissenting opinion because of this entire woke movement and cancel culture, that having any sort of dissenting opinion, you get canceled because it's not popular.
Yeah, it is really dangerous. And in the same breath, they're like, oh, the Russian media is not telling the Russian citizens the truth. Okay, that's maybe true. I don't know, could be. But then we do the same thing. Like I can't, and I've done so many videos on this. I've posted this on social media. And in some ways I've done it sort of like joking sarcastically, like I stand with Ukraine, but Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, Palestine, them I can't stand for because I got a bad back. Like the hypocrisy of this. I mean, okay, Putin is bombing innocent people and they're showing all this footage out of Ukraine and it's awful. And I'm against war. So I'm against any war from
Mhm.
anybody. But then like the American politicians in both parties and the American media, like, do they not have the internet? Can they not look up what the US has done in the Middle East in the last 20 years? We're talking like anywhere from, I've heard numbers as 4 million on up to 10, 11 million people have died from the global war on terror that the US has pushed and funded. Like,
Exactly. Exactly, but they don't push it in mainstream media because that's not part of the US agenda right now. Right now, part of this US agenda, this is an extended agenda, is this entire fear of power rising in the East. And this goes hand in hand with a couple of years ago when we were here talking about China's rising power and everything. And so if you think about it, it literally is a difference in philosophical views. They are grouping Russia and China into this little big broad stroke communist bucket that they view as a threat to the Western democratic, Western democracy way of life. And so because of that, they're making this such a big point. And that's why Russia is the big enemy. And because they're attacking Ukraine, this is the big focal point. But yes, you're absolutely right. Any of the other wars that the US has waged in the Middle East, no, they weren't significant because it was not against a world power. It was not against anyone that was really a threat to the American way of life.
yeah. And by American way of life, I mean, let's be real clear what that is. It's actually American corporations. I mean, it's the oil companies. They don't want Russia. I mean, they literally said it. And this is a couple months ago before the Russian invasion. They basically said, we don't want this pipeline between Russia and Germany. We want Western Europe to buy American natural gas and oil, and it's more expensive. So
Oh,
it's
yes.
just like,
Absolutely. Yes. Americans just trying to dictate their business and economics all over. We don't care if it's good for Germany, if it's cheaper, if it makes economical sense for Germany to do anything. No, we just want them to do whatever we want them to do and control it because we want our friends to only be on our side and not potentially have other allies that are dependent elsewhere. And that is essentially what the US fears the most. And it's really unfortunate that they don't take a step back and see that they're actually kind of being the big bullies. They're accusing China of unfair trade practices. Like, I don't know how this can be classified as fair. You need to buy more expensive oil from the US, not with your other trading partner, Russia, even though it's cheaper. You need to sacrifice your business ethics and everything, business acumen, and buy more expensive product for your citizens. Why? That's considered fair trade practice?
yeah. And it's like, it's so funny. And I'm sure you've covered this. I've covered it too on this show. Is like Russia, and China got off of the petrodollar, and they use their own currency now, I believe. And didn't China start using the petro yuan? Like,
Yeah, so they've been testing the digital RMB through their system and trade oil. And that's something that is actually gaining a lot of traction. So both China and Russia, they've started to go to not use the US dollar as much. And I think that one, it was because they knew that sanctions, they were coming. They were coming down eventually. And in the end, they were going to be forced to choose what currency to use. And if sanctions actually did come, if they were banned from the SWIFT network, then they have to be ready for something else. And China and Russia, they've had over 50 years to figure out what that other option is. And right now, unfortunately, US dollar is the dollar reserve right now, and it's still a very powerful reserve. The only reason being is that there is no secondary competitor right now. There is no secondary currency that is as powerful, as widely distributed currently as the US dollar. The RMB is rising up to be a major challenger, but I don't think it is quite there yet. They're still testing it. They're still doing very limited volumes. The RMB is still, it's a lot more volatile compared to the US dollar. But I do say that the US dollar is in a very precarious place. And I never thought in my lifetime that we'd be witnessing something like this, because how I see it, it's almost like the fall of a giant, because we're on the precipice of the downfall of the US dollar. Not saying it's going to happen like now or in the next 50 years, but I think we really are seeing the cracks right now, because the US dollar is supposed to be this big international currency. And an international currency is supposed to be neutral. But now Washington is just completely changing the rules. So if Washington doesn't like you, they can put sanctions on you, and then you can't use the US dollar. So if that happens, many countries, they're going to start looking for a competitor. Because if you're a country and having this threat loom over you, that's literally like a sword hanging above your neck. So countries right now, like China, Russia, India, and Brazil, they're all looking for competing currencies or payment networks because Washington doesn't play fair anymore. And if Washington doesn't think Europe is looking at other currency, then they're just fooling themselves, because it's not like Europe and Washington, they're friends right now. But who knows, 50, 60, 80 years later, if that's still going to be true. So they're still going to be looking for other options, because Washington has shown their face now. And Russia, they currently have about 16% of their reserves in the US dollar, 32% in the euros. So that's basically 50% of their reserves in currencies that are controlled by people who are cutting them off. So while their own currency right now isn't an option, other things like the RMB, they're starting to look increasingly like a viable option.
Wow. I did not know that they have that much in US dollar and euros in their reserve. That's insane. I mean, and it's funny because it reminds me of something when you were on this show. I think the first time, it was the summer of 2020, and you talked about a lot of companies. You said at that in that time that they were shorting the dollar, and you were like, it's not looking good for the US economy. And I've having you on the show several times, and I had Max Kaiser and his wife on the show, and they were talking about, you know, all this money printing that has happened during all the stimulus, and America is really in all of its bullying, especially the last 4 decades, the last 2 decades of the bullying with regard to the, you know, global war on terror. And anyone that gets off the petrodollar, boy, they get one between the eyes, man. Gaddafi, Saddam, not that those guys were good dudes, but like anytime somebody gets off the petrodollar, we go to war with them or we sanction them.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're seeing now, and I want to hear your input on this, because according to the American media, Russia is isolated and the whole world stands against them. It's like, well, if you look at a map, you've got 1.5 billion Chinese. There are 1 billion people in India. So like Russia, China, and India are all like forming an alliance. You're starting to even get, I mean, all these Middle Eastern countries are just waiting to do business with somebody else, because we basically destroyed their countries and killed people and bombed the shit out of them. It feels like America, I mean, is really this doubling down. We're trying, and the military defense industry, which spent $49 million on campaigns in 2020, 2.7 million to Trump, 3.1 million to Biden. So we were going to war with Russia regardless. In my opinion, the defense industry wants to send all this weaponry, and that, you know, the defense industry just profits from war. Hey, everybody, thanks for watching. We are still in our 9th month of demonetization from YouTube. So support what we're doing at patreon.com/Graham Elwood or rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, which is a blockchain cryptocurrency platform. It's free to sign up, and there's a premium level at $10 a month. And for that, you get everybody on the platform's premium content. Myself, Lee Camp, Ron Placone, Jimmy Dore, Whitney Webb, Kim Iverson, Abby Martin, and many, many others. You can also support what we're doing at Venmo at Graham-Elwood, and go to GrahamElwood.com. We have a PayPal button and a PO box. I also have crypto wallets, which are all in the show notes. Thanks for supporting what we do.